Let me declare now that the launch of the Tiangong-2 is a complete success.
China shoots for the stars as it enters a new phase in its space exploration with the launch of a new space laboratory, the Tiangong-2. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. China has launched a space lab for astronauts, signaling a new era in its race to explore outer space. With the Tiangong-2 space laboratory, China is making leaps towards space research and exploration. CCTV's Guan Yang watched the launch and sent us this report.
24 years after the country launched its manned space program, this is what it has achieved. The Long March 2F rocket with Tiangong-2 on board ignites the sky above the Gobi Desert. This is it. After years of dedication, China's second space lab is now being sent into orbit. It is actually referred to as China's first real space laboratory. With that, a new chapter in China's manned space program has been opened.
I am so excited. Come on, China.
I've seen the takeoffs many times, so for tonight's launch, I've watched it from different angles. It was breathtaking.
The new space lab will be used to conduct various experiments in the field of aerospace medicine, space science, and on-orbit maintenance. It is capable of receiving manned spacecraft and a cargo ship for propellants resupply. Most importantly, to test the water for China's future space program.
The living quarters of the new space lab have been improved for midterm on-orbit stays. 2 astronauts can stay there for 30 days without getting resupply.
Since launching its first manned space station in 2003, China staged a spacewalk, landed a rover on the moon, and launched a demo space station Tiangong-1 in 2011. Today, the launch of Tiangong-2 Space Lab helps to realizing the Chinese dream in space exploration. Guanyang, CCTV, Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center.
Joining us now to discuss China's space exploration from Beijing, Yang Yuguang is a professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. From Texas, Leroy Chiao is a retired NASA astronaut and former International Space Station commander. With us in the studio, Victoria Sampson is the Washington director of the Secure World Foundation, which promotes sustainable space exploration. And via Skype from Dublin, Lewis Brennan is a professor of business at Trinity College and author of the book, The Business of Space. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Yang Yuguang, let me start with you in Beijing. So China has launched this space laboratory, that launch taking place, as we just reported, on Thursday. Why is this launch so important to China's space exploration program?
Well, you know that China's manned space program have a 3-step strategy. The first step is to master the basic technologies for man in space. And the second step to have a space laboratory in space and have short-term duration in space. And third step will establish its own space station. We have accomplished the Tiangong-1 and Shenzhou 8, 9, and 10 mission. With these missions, we have mastered the rendezvous and docking technology, which is very critical and essential for the future construction of the space station. And this Tiangong-2, together with the Shenzhou 11 and the Tianzhou-1 cargo ship, will form the final stage of the second step. So the launch of Tiangong-2 will be a very critical and very important step for this stage. So if it cannot be successful, the Shenzhou 11 spaceship and the Tianzhou-1 target cargo ship will lose its target. So the Tiangong-2 laboratory will be very important. And after launch, we will have also many critical steps necessary for the future experiment. For instance, yesterday we have just performed 2 orbit maneuvers and changed the orbit from elliptical one to a circular one, and also raise its altitude. This is also very important for the future rendezvous and docking with Shenzhou 11 spaceship. And with this preparation works, we will test the midterm stay of astronauts in space. For you see, in the future, the astronauts will stay longer in its space station. And also, we will next year test the refueling technology, which is also very critical for the establishment of the future space station.
Okay, Leroy, we've got a lot of information there on what this laboratory is doing right now, the fact that its orbit has changed from an elliptical one to a circular one. You're the man who's been in space. Take us to the mechanics of what happens in a launch like this. So we have the lab that's going up, but the astronauts that are going to be living in that lab only go up next month. Then what happens?
Right, so the crew will launch next month. They'll go and rendezvous and dock to Tiangong-2, much the same way that the crews that went to Tiangong-1 demonstrated the capability. And the difference is this time this crew is going to live for 30 days on the station, which is a little over twice as long as the previous longest crew of the Chinese Tiangong-1 station. They'll be doing a number of different tests, as we heard, including, I'm sure, proofing out a new life support system. Later next year, they'll be testing out refueling capability with their Tianzhou resupply ship and refueling ship. And so this is really a nice measured step, the next step along the way, if you will, of advancing their space operations capability. In 2006, I was the first American invited to the Astronaut Center of China, and in addition to getting to meet Yang Liwei and Fei Junlong and some of the other astronauts, I got to tour the center and look at the technology, and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. But what I recognize is that they lack operational experience, and so they're very methodically in a stepwise fashion gaining that experience as they move towards their actual space station, you know, their more permanently crewed space station scheduled for launch, first element in 2018.
But Leroy, in terms of what the space vehicles are doing right now, like the International Space Station, this laboratory is built over time, piece by piece, is it?
That's correct, and so it's going to be a smaller station than the ISS. It's going to be a bit simpler. The construction phase, it looks like it'll be automatic docking of 2 additional modules to the core module that's going to be launched in 2018. And actually, it's not a criticism at all, because actually we demonstrated the capability to do a very complex space structure in building the ISS, and it is by far the most complex and audacious facility that's ever been conceived and executed and now operated. But really, there's an argument to be made for smaller, more simple stations that maybe require a little bit less maintenance and could possibly end up doing a higher percentage of its time using it for utilization, actually doing the experiment research operations. You know, it's a little bit analogous to having a big house here on Earth or a smaller one. You know, the smaller one generally takes a little less maintenance, and maybe you've got more time to do other things.
Okay, let's bring in Lewis from Dublin. And Lewis, China's space program has made great strides in a very short space of time, but how does it compare internationally with the whole array of space programs that we see financed by other countries?
China's space program thus far, given China's space development over the past several decades, has been quite impressive. And of course, its ambition, as you've indicated, is quite great. However, relative to the US space program in terms of the amount of expenditure involved, the US space program is still several multiples of the China space program. But interestingly, the activity that's going on in terms of launches on satellites from China, well, not at the same level as that in the case of the US, is still very impressive when one compares the relative expenditures by the 2 countries. So I would argue that the productivity of China's space program is quite significant relative to the US. It still as well lags behind in terms of expenditure and in terms of state of development. The European space agencies space program. But looking ahead, I would expect, I mean, we said in our book, The Business of Space, that China will be a major space player into the future. And all the steps that it's taken, very deliberate, very graduated, very measured, all indicate that into the future, China will indeed be a major player in space, and eventually on a par with the other major players in space.
All right, and Victoria, when we look at a program like this, it's an ambitious program. What are the kinds of challenges that the Chinese would face?
Well, space is tricky. It is rocket science for a reason. And so as we saw even last week when the United States here in SpaceX had a rocket blow up, there are always going to be some issues to work out with the technological issues. But in addition to that, there's the political ramifications and diplomatic concerns about what China plans to do with the space capabilities. There are some within the United States that are very, shall we say, leery about what China intends to do. They worry that perhaps they're trying not just to become a major space power, but to become a peer competitor or to overcome the United States in a domain that the U.S. national security community is traditionally seen as theirs to work in alone. And so that's going to be something that definitely we need to work through international discussions.
So these programs have what, a security application, a military application?
The human spaceflight, no, but China has tested what has been considered to be an anti-satellite capability.
Right.
At least 5 times they've put what they said was a science experiment up a geostationary orbit in 2013, and that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people who thought the U.S. early warning satellites would be out of reach of anything China had to put up there.
Yang Yuguang, what do you make of those concerns that Victoria's been talking about here?
You see that China developed its manned space program due to its own requirement, not competitor with any other countries. And also, you see, yes, the space technology has dual use. This is because the space technology comes from the early stage of the World War II. And during the moon race and the early stage space stations, they do have some military purposes of this station. But in recent years, it proved that the military purposes in the manned space program is not very efficient, not very effective. So mainly in recent years, the manned space program are purely for scientific research goal. And also, China developed its space program, especially the manned space program and deep space exploration program, just for the benefit of the whole human being and also the national economy to promote the development of technologies.
So, Yang Yuguang, we have Tiangong-2. It's going to conduct several experiments in space. What can you tell us about these experiments, and what do the Chinese hope to learn from them?
Well, there will be many interesting experiments. For instance, as I mentioned, that the future astronauts will stay in space station for every expedition team will stay there for half a year, very similar to that in the ISS. So to master this technology, we must find what kind of problems can we meet. So this time we will let the astronaut to stay there for a month in the Tiangong-2 space laboratory. And with this midterm period, we will have plenty of chances to perform many experiments. During the 80 days, they will perform 14 experiments on board the Tiangong-2. One of them is the super-cold atomic clock, which is a very accurate clock, which is even much better than the traditional atomic clocks used on the Beidou navigation satellites. So if this experiment will be successful, the navigation system will have higher performance. I hope this can be successful. And also, you know that China has launched the Mozi or MISHES quantum science experimental satellites last month. This time, China will also have the quantum encryption key distribution experiments on board the Tiangong-2. So this will be more practical technology in the future. I believe it will also benefit the whole world. And besides that,
right,
we also have some cooperation experiments with other countries, such as the gamma ray burst experiment with ESA, and also some kind of space cardiology study with other countries.
Leroy, let's take a listen to what Wu Ping of the China Manned Space Engineering Office had to say about the country's space program. Let's watch this.
这是我国持续时间最长的一次载人飞行。
This will be China's longest manned spaceflight. Shenzhou 11 is our 6th manned spaceflight. Our astronauts will travel on Shenzhou 11 to dock with the Tiangong-2 space lab. They will stay on Tiangong-2 for 30 days. If we add the 3 days travel, the total time in space will be 33 days, up from the 15 days of the Shenzhou 10 mission. So this will be the longest manned spaceflight in China's history.
So, Leroy, these astronauts will spend 33 days in space. You've been a space commander on the International Space Station. What can these astronauts expect during these 33 days?
Well, 33 days is going to be a lot different than, just a 1 week or even a 2 week trip. What they'll find after about close to the 4th week is your body will start to kind of equilibrate. It'll start to adapt more fully to the weightless environment. So I think what they'll measure, what they'll find from their experiments is that it'll be a little bit different than what they've found in their earlier flights, which were much shorter. So the astronauts will have more of a chance to adapt, both physiologically as well as mentally. They'll kind of settle more into a routine. The analogy of the earlier flights would be like a shuttle mission, a 1 or 2 week shuttle mission. Those always felt like a sprint to me. You get up there, you're trained, every minute counts, and you're working pretty hard, and then it seems like it's almost over before it began. But on a station flight, right around a month, you start kind of settling into a routine. So just as they start getting into that routine, unfortunately for them, I guess they'll be coming back to Earth. But of course, China's going to be flying longer missions as well. I would think on Tiangong-2, and then eventually, of course, as they build and operate their newer and bigger space station.
Okay, I want to talk about the business of space, but we are going to have to take a break right now. Coming up, what's the next phase of China's space exploration? Stay with us, you're watching The Heat. China's successful launch of the Tiangong-2, a space laboratory, represents the latest victory in China's space exploration. So, what's next? Still with us, Yang Yuguang, professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Leroy Chiao is a retired NASA astronaut. Victoria Sampson is an expert in global space exploration. Louis Brennan is the author of The Business of Space. And let's start this segment with Louis. Louis, who are the main players in the space business right now? Of course, we know about the United States program. That's the ISS, which is circling the Earth. But who are the other big players?
The other big players, along with the American activity in space with the ISS and so forth, is the European Space Agency, and then I would say followed by China. But you also have other players, for example, India, which on a very, very low-cost basis has made significant strides into space, including sending a probe to Mars. And it's done so because it has leveraged frugal innovation in terms of its space development and its space technologies. But you have lesser players as well, such as Brazil, for example, who've also been engaged in satellite development and so forth. But the key aspect then in terms of who are the players in space is that we've been seeing a very significant development in space over the past 10 years and more, and that is the entry into space of private sector players and private sector actors. So that, for example, we see with SpaceX, we see with Blue Origin, we see with other players such as Richard Branson's Virgin Galactica. We see now a plethora of private sector players coming into the space sector. So as we move forward, the expectation will be that you will see a less major role being played by national players and a greater role being played by private sector players in space activity and in space exploration and in the exploitation of space for commercial purposes.
Victoria, with all these myriad players getting involved in the space exploration business, both private and public, what is the potential for cooperation, for collaboration between countries and, for that matter, companies?
Well, one of the interesting things by having all these new players is that all of them understand the rules of the road. How do you have a responsible space actor working in orbit so they don't affect other people's ability to utilize space? And so by bringing in everyone, the major stakeholders on these issues, you can have a good discussion about what are the norms of behavior, what's responsible space behavior, and try and get some cooperative efforts go along those ways. In addition, it astonishes me, to be honest, that the United States and China do not cooperate in space. The United States is actually...
Is that because of that law that was passed which actually prevents Chinese astronauts from working on the ISS?
Through congressional legislation, the White House and NASA are not allowed to do any kind of bilateral cooperation with China. Right. Now, that does not mean the United States doesn't work with China in terms of discussions via the State Department or the Department of Defense. The United States sends China information on orbits, on objects in orbit. So we do some information like that, but it's part of a general problem. The United States doesn't know what to do about China. But we really need to figure out some way to work together because to the major space stakeholders, it's up to us to make sure that space is usable over the long term.
And when we look at the programs that are financed by national governments compared to the ones that are financed by private companies, how do they compare?
Well, I mean, the national governments definitely, they're bigger. Yeah. But the ones that are coming from the commercial space sector that were discussed earlier, they're faster, they're more technologically savvy, they're getting to put things up more quickly, and they're utilizing increasing numbers of technology. And so they're really more flexible and agile. So it's an interesting situation where you have a big difference between the dinosaurs, so to speak, of space and the new players.
Difficult to talk about dinosaurs in space then. Yang Yuguang, China has very ambitious space goals. I mean, from this manned flight, it's hoping to, as Leroy was telling us earlier on, support a space station in about 5 years. So what happens after this project? What are the sort of benchmarks or milestones that we'll be looking for?
Well, the China's leaders have mentioned that China now is a big country in space field because we already have many launches just after the United States every year. In the future, we hope that we can become an advanced country in space field. To achieve this goal, we not only need to establish a space station in low Earth orbit. We just recognize it as a national level laboratory in space and perform the scientific research which can lead the technologies, promote the technologies, and benefit the national economy and also that of the human being. In the future, China is also planned to have more activities in space, for instance, such as the robotic missions to Mars and also to Jupiter and other celestial bodies of the solar system. This field, I believe that is a good chance for all countries, including the United States, cooperate together with China. Meanwhile, China also performed many scientific research schemes. In recent years, China has launched many scientific research satellites, such as the dark matter particle exploration satellite, the MORS quantum science satellite, and also in the future we will also have more scientific research satellites. And also we have the high definition Earth observation schemes, which provide many good images, either the radar images or the optical images to benefit civilians. So in the future, China will do all kinds of things in the space field to not only promote its technologies, but also to have more applications in this field to benefit common people and also the country's economy.
Leroy, when we talk about cooperation, collaboration in space exploration, we hear this term, space diplomacy. For instance, on the ISS, I mean, there have been people from, I'm not sure how many countries, but several nationalities who've been on the space station, who worked on the space station. How important is that?
Oh, I think it's very important. If you take a step back and look at the big picture, you know, the first and foremost reason a country gets into the human spaceflight business is for national prestige and for projecting soft power. And so when you have an organization or a project like the International Space Station where you have former Cold War enemies, former World War II enemies come together and create this incredible, very visible civil project, everyone is aligned, at least in that one thing. And so it's in everyone's interest that the project succeed. People talk about Russia and why are we working with with the Russians. Relations now aren't great between the United States and Russia, but I would say they would be much worse if we weren't working together on this one very visible project, at least in this project. And for that reason alone, I think it makes a lot of sense to bring China in. We've been talking about cooperation. I've been quietly trying to advocate for that for the last 10 or so years, and it just amazes me that there's certain members of the U.S. Congress that are so short-sighted. They don't see that we're actually doing ourselves. The United States is doing itself a disservice by not working with China. All the other space agencies, including, of course, Russia, which should have been mentioned a little earlier, they are all moving forward, and they are talking about going to the moons. The Europeans have been talking to Russia about sending astronauts to the moon now for a few years. China very recently publicly declared that they intend to land astronauts on the moon, and so we, the United States, would be natural leaders of that international program. And so I think we're going to miss the boat if we don't do that.
Okay, Lewis, very quickly, I've got about a minute left. Your book, of course, is called The Business of Space. You've written the book. How much room is there for the commercialization and private enterprise in space?
I think there's a great deal of opportunity. I mean, it's been mentioned that when we think of space from the point of view of national players, prestige is one element. A second element then is scientific experimentation. A third element, of course, is the military one that you mentioned. But increasingly, I think we're going to see that commercial opportunities, and the commercial opportunities stem for a number of reasons. First of all, there's the technologies that are driven by the needs of space exploration and the needs of the humanization of space. And these technologies are likely, as they develop, to spawn new industries that we don't even imagine at the moment. There's opportunities in terms of space travel, space tourism, mining of materials and so on. There's opportunities in terms of energy. So the list is really endless. The opportunities are there. I think that private sector players are increasingly sensing that, and I anticipate that we're going to see whole new industries blossom out of space that at the moment we can't even imagine.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's all we have time for. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.